My name is Valerie Vance. I'm 28 years old, and I closed a $47 million corporate restructuring deal before most people my age had even sat in a boardroom meeting. Let that sink in for a second. While my college friends were still figuring out how to negotiate their entry-level salaries, I was flying business class to Singapore, restructuring failing divisions for Fortune 500 companies, and quietly building a financial portfolio that most people only dream about on Pinterest boards. I wore tailored blazers to rooms where men, twice my age, took notes when I spoke. I understood leverage ratios, stakeholder mapping, and organizational debt better than most executives who had been doing this for decades. But none of that mattered to my mother, Eleanor Vance. To Eleanor, I was still the daughter who never settled down, who wasted her youth chasing spreadsheets, and who, her personal favorite, had no real security because corporate jobs disappear overnight. She said that last one at every single family dinner, right after she finished asking me to quietly transfer money to cover whatever financial gap she and my brother Julian had created that month. The night my life changed forever started at a dinner party. Not just any dinner party. Eleanor's infamous social showcase events, the ones she threw every few months to perform wealth in front of neighbors and distant relatives who barely knew our last name. She rented extra furniture for these nights, swapped out the everyday dishes for the good china. She kept locked in a cabinet like museum artifacts, sprayed the house with expensive reed diffusers she'd ordered online, and pretended were gifts from a dear friend in Florence. I walked in that Friday evening carrying 2 bags, a bottle of Barolo I'd picked up from a boutique wine shop near my office, and a genuine smile I was already beginning to regret. The living room was full. I recognized some faces. Aunt Patricia, with her perpetual expression of mild disapproval. The Hendersons from 2 streets over who Eleanor had been aggressively befriending since they'd renovated their kitchen, and a cluster of people I'd never seen before, clustered near the fireplace, laughing too loudly at something Julian had just said. Julian. He was standing in the center of the room in a slim-fit navy blazer. I was almost certain I'd seen on the corporate account statement from 3 months ago. He had a glass of whiskey in one hand, and that particular grin on his face, the one that meant he'd already decided tonight was about him, and had arranged the room accordingly. He was 24 years old and had not held a steady job for longer than 6 weeks in his entire adult life. But you wouldn't know that from watching him work a room, if you've ever walked into your own family's home and immediately felt like an outsider. Go ahead and drop a comment below, because what I'm about to tell you is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. Eleanor spotted me from across the room. For exactly half a second, something warm flickered across her face. Then her eyes dropped to my outfit, a clean, tailored cream blouse and dark trousers, perfectly professional, and the warmth recalibrated into something more like assessment. Valerie. She crossed the room and kissed the air near my cheek. You're late. And you should have worn the green dress. You look like you came from the office. I did come from the office, Mom. Well, she took the Barolo from my hands without looking at it. Try to be charming tonight. Julian's friend Marcus is here with his family. They're in commercial real estate. Very established. She said the word established the way some people say holy, with reverence, with longing, with the particular hunger of someone who had spent their whole life feeling like they were standing outside a window looking in. I followed her into the room and tried. I really did try. I shook hands. I made conversation. I listened to Marcus's father talk for 11 uninterrupted minutes about a waterfront development project in Miami, while nodding at the appropriate intervals. I deflected 3 separate questions about whether I was seeing anyone with the kind of graceful subject change that years of boardroom diplomacy is instinctive, and then it happened. Eleanor was refilling glasses near the dining table when Mrs. Henderson, the one with the freshly renovated kitchen, asked her the question I had heard 100 versions of before. Eleanor, your children are so different from each other. Julian is so present, so social, and Valerie, what is it she does again, exactly? I was standing 4 feet away. Eleanor didn't lower her voice. Oh, Valerie does some kind of consulting work. She waved her hand like she was describing a hobby. Corporate things, very technical, nothing that translates well at a dinner table. a small laugh. Julian is actually the one with the real head for people. He's going to be doing something in business development soon. Very exciting things ahead for him. Julian, across the room, caught my eye and smiled. Not a kind smile. The other kind. The one that said, "Did you hear that, and aren't you tired of this? And this is just how it is all at the same time." My jaw tightened. I set my wine glass down on the nearest surface very carefully. The way you set something down when your hands are doing one thing and your brain is doing something else entirely. Here is what Eleanor did not mention to Mrs. Henderson that night. I had been transferring $3,400 every single month into a joint account Eleanor used for household expenses. I had paid off the remaining balance on Julian's 2 credit cards, combined debt of $18,700, without being asked, because Eleanor had called me crying on a Tuesday afternoon, and I had said yes before she even finished the sentence. I had co-signed Julian's lease on his previous apartment, which he'd vacated 8 months early, leaving me to negotiate with the landlord and absorb the penalty fees. I had quietly, without announcement, without expectation of gratitude, built a financial floor underneath this family so they could perform the kind of lifestyle they believed they deserved. None of that translated well at a dinner table either, apparently. You know what the most exhausting thing in the world is? Being someone's financial infrastructure while they introduce you as a footnote. If that sentence just hit different, stay with me, because this story is only getting started. But here is the thing about being a corporate consultant that Eleanor never understood, despite benefiting from it for years. We are trained to see systems. We walk into a failing organization, and within 48 hours, we can map exactly where the money is leaking, where the decision-making is broken, and which relationships are costing more than they're producing. We write it up in clean frameworks with clear recommendations, and then we hand that document to whoever is paying us. I had never once applied that framework to my own family. Standing in that living room, listening to Eleanor describe my career as something that didn't translate, something clicked behind my sternum, quiet and precise, like the sound of a lock engaging. I looked at the room differently. I saw the reed diffusers Eleanor had ordered online. I saw Julian's blazer charged to my account. I saw the extra rented chairs arranged in careful rows, and the good china pulled from its cabinet, and the performance cost of prosperity that my money had made possible. I saw the system. And for the first time in 8 years of quietly, obediently funding this family's self-image, I started running the numbers, not emotionally, not with anger or grief, or the kind of desperate need for acknowledgement I'd carried since I was 19 years old and first started writing checks to keep the lights on. Just the numbers, the cold, clean, irrefutable arithmetic of exactly what I had built, what I had paid for, and most importantly, what I legally owned. I picked up my wine glass again. I took a long, slow sip of the Barolo Eleanor hadn't even glanced at, and I smiled at Mrs. Henderson across the room. "It was lovely meeting you," I said, perfectly warm, perfectly composed. "Excuse me for just a moment." I stepped outside onto the back porch, pulled out my phone, and opened the property management folder. I kept in a private, encrypted drive. The beach house title was still in my name, the LLC was still active, and I had just started doing math. I want to tell you something that nobody talks about when they describe people like me. The ones who hold everything together quietly. The ones who transfer money on Tuesday afternoons because someone called crying. The ones who co-sign leases and absorb penalty fees and show up to dinner parties, carrying good wine that nobody notices. Nobody talks about the moment those people stop feeling and start calculating. It doesn't happen dramatically. There's no explosion, no screaming, no thrown plates. It happens the way a spreadsheet populates, one cell at a time, cold and precise, until the total at the bottom makes everything suddenly, permanently clear. That night, after Eleanor's dinner party, I drove back to my apartment and I did not cry. I opened my laptop. I opened the master financial folder. I kept meticulously organized in a private encrypted cloud drive, color-coded by category, cross-referenced by date, every transaction documented with receipts, the way my first consulting mentor taught me. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen. And I started reading, not skimming, reading, the way you read a contract before you sign it. The way you read a client's financial history before you walk into a restructuring meeting. With full attention, zero sentiment, and the specific kind of clarity that only comes when you have finally completely stopped, hoping the numbers will tell a different story than the one you already know. The first transfer I found was dated 8 years ago. I was 19, 3 months into my first real consulting internship, making $2,200 a month before taxes. Eleanor had called on a Wednesday evening. The electricity bill, just this once. She'd sorted out next month $300. I scrolled down. The transfers didn't stop at $340. They didn't stop the next month, or the month after that. They grew. Slowly at first, then faster, the way organizational debt always grows. When nobody addresses the root cause and everyone just keeps patching the surface. By the time I was 23 and pulling a genuine consultant's salary, the monthly transfer to Eleanor's household account had become as automatic as rent. $1,500, then $2,400, then $3,400, where it had lived for the past 2 years without a single conversation about whether it was sustainable, necessary, or, and this was the number that sat at the bottom of everything, appreciated. I need to pause here and ask you something directly. Have you ever given so consistently, so quietly, that the people receiving it stopped seeing it as generosity and started seeing it as simply your function? Drop a comment if you know exactly what I mean, because what I found in that folder next is something I still think about. I pulled up the Julian file. I had a Julian file. That alone should have told me something. The credit card payoffs were the largest single entries, $18,700 combined, paid in 2 installments 18 months apart. Because Julian had a pattern of building debt in cycles that Eleanor would eventually bring to me, like a weather report. It's getting bad again. You know how he is. He just needs a reset. I had given Julian 4 resets, each one larger than the last, each one accompanied by a genuine, earnest promise from Julian that this time he had a plan. This time things were different. This time the business idea was real. There was the apartment lease, my name on the cosign, 8 months of abandoned tenancy, $200 in penalties. I'd negotiated down from $600 to $800 through 3 conversations with the landlord, who was, frankly, more reasonable than he needed to be. There was the car. The navy blazer Julian had been wearing at the dinner party should have reminded me, but it was the car that made me stop scrolling entirely and just sit with it for a moment. 14 months ago, Julian had needed reliable transportation for what he described as a serious career opportunity in sales. I had added him as an authorized user on my corporate business account and leased a vehicle under the LLC, a sleek, charcoal gray luxury sedan that Julian had immediately begun referring to as his car to anyone who would listen. The lease payments came out of the business account automatically. I had absorbed them into operating costs without thinking about it too carefully. The way you stop noticing a slow leak when you've been mopping the same floor for years. The vehicle was currently registered under my LLC. I wrote that down separately, circled it, and moved on. Then I pulled up the beach house file. The Malibu property had started as a business decision dressed in family clothes, the way most of my financial choices involving Eleanor eventually were. 3 years ago, she had been talking about wanting to establish roots somewhere beautiful. Eleanor's language for wanting to perform a lifestyle she hadn't earned. Julian had been amplifying it the way he amplified everything. Eleanor wanted, enthusiastically, and without any consideration of cost, because the cost was never his to consider. I had run the numbers quietly. I had spoken to my property attorney, Marcus Webb, who had been handling my business account since I was 24. I had structured a purchase through a private LLC, Coastal Asset Holdings, a name deliberately chosen for its anonymity, and acquired the Malibu beach house for $2.1 million. Eleanor and Julian moved in believing they were renting from a private landlord, a discreet, wealthy investor who preferred to remain anonymous. The monthly rent they paid was a fraction of the actual carrying costs. I covered the mortgage, the property taxes, the maintenance, the insurance, everything, through the LLC, while Eleanor decorated the living room and hosted garden parties and told the neighbors she had wonderful landlords who never interfere. She had no idea. The landlord's name was on her birth certificate. I sat back in my chair and looked at the total. I had calculated at the bottom of the document 8 years, monthly transfers, credit card payoffs, lease penalties, vehicle costs, beach house carrying expenses $634,000. $634,000. I need you to really sit with that number for a second before we continue, not as an abstraction, as years, as Tuesday afternoon phone calls, as dinner parties where I was described as someone whose work doesn't translate. If you're still watching, I already know something important about you. Keep going. Here is what a corporate consultant does when she identifies a system that is bleeding resources with zero return on investment. She stops the bleeding, not emotionally, not impulsively, methodically, legally, and with the kind of documentation that makes outcomes permanent. Over the next 48 hours, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Marcus Webb. I told him I needed to review the Beach House LLC structure and discuss what a formal eviction process would look like for current occupants. Marcus, who had known me long enough to recognize the specific quietness in my voice, that meant I had already made a decision, said he would prepare the paperwork and have it ready within 72 hours. He did not ask unnecessary questions. That was why I paid him. The second call was to my corporate account manager at the leasing company. I notified them that I would be deactivating the business account associated with the vehicle currently operated by Valerie Vance. The deactivation would be processed within 5 business days. I requested documentation confirming the asset reverted to LLC control. They emailed it to me within the hour. The third call was to a private security firm I had used for a client's asset protection case 2 years prior. Professional, discreet, and very good at executing logistics under time pressure. I explained what I needed and when. They confirmed availability without commentary. I did all of this sitting at my kitchen table in a clean gray sweater, drinking black coffee with my encrypted drive open on one screen and the LLC documents open on another. My hands were steady, my voice was level. The grief from the night before, the specific, bone-deep grief of standing 4 feet away from your mother while she described your entire professional existence as something that doesn't translate, had not disappeared. It had simply changed form. It had become architecture, a plan with load-bearing walls, a structure built on documentation, legal standing, and the irrefutable advantage of being the person whose name was on every single asset this family had built their performance around. Eleanor wanted to host a garden party for Julian's wealthy future in-laws this weekend. She wanted to present a picture of establishment, of status, of a family that had arrived somewhere worth arriving at. I was going to let her. I was going to let the decorations go up, let the guests arrive, let Julian polish his rented personality, and Eleanor rehearse her carefully curated version of our family history one final time. And then I was going to let Marcus Webb walk through those gates with a court official and 2 sheriff's deputies. I closed my laptop at 2:14 in the morning. I washed my coffee cup. I turned off the kitchen light. Tomorrow, I had work to do. Not the kind that doesn't translate. The kind that changes everything. Chapter 3 is where it all breaks open. The moment Valerie stops waiting to be seen and starts making sure they can't look away. You are not going to want to miss what happens at that garden party. There is a specific kind of silence that exists in the moment before everything changes. Not peaceful silence, not the comfortable kind you find on a Sunday morning with coffee and no obligations. This is the silence of a held breath, the silence of a system running its final calculations before the output appears on the screen. The silence of knowing, with the cold, complete certainty of someone who has checked every variable and confirmed every number, exactly what is about to happen and choosing, deliberately, to let it. I knew that silence intimately by Saturday morning. I had been living inside it for 72 hours. I woke up at 6:00 a.m. without an alarm, the way I always do before a major client deliverable. My body treats high-stakes moments the same way regardless of context. It sharpens, focuses, eliminates everything unnecessary, the way a good restructuring plan eliminates redundant costs. I showered, dressed in a bone-white wool-tailored blazer and slim charcoal trousers, and ate breakfast standing at my kitchen counter. Black coffee, 2 eggs, whole-grain toast, practical, efficient. The meal of someone who has a schedule to keep. Marcus Webb had texted at 7:48 a.m. Documents confirmed. Court official confirmed for 1 p.m. Deputies will arrive simultaneously. Everything is in order. I typed back 2 words, thank you. Then I drove to Malibu. I parked 3 streets away from the beach house at 11:30 a.m. and walked the rest of the way on foot because I wanted to see it before they saw me. I needed one clear, unobstructed look at what I had built. What I had paid for, maintained, protected, and quietly subsidized for 3 years. While Eleanor told the neighbors she had wonderful landlords, the house was beautiful. It had always been beautiful. That had been the point. 2,800 square feet of clean architectural lines and ocean-facing glass, sitting on a lot that caught the morning light in a way that made the whole property glow, like something out of a luxury real estate catalog. I had chosen it specifically because Eleanor had torn a photo of something similar out of a magazine and left it on the kitchen counter, where I would see it during one of my visits. Her version of wishing out loud, the way she had done my entire childhood, placing desire in visible locations and waiting for someone else to convert it into reality. I had converted it into reality. I had converted it into reality, and then structured the ownership so carefully, so cleanly, through Coastal Asset Holdings LLC, that Eleanor had lived inside my investment for 3 years, without ever once thinking to ask whose name was actually on the deed. That was not an accident. That was a corporate consultant who understood. Even then, that assets and relationships required the same foundational principle. Document everything. Protect your position. And never transfer ownership without understanding exactly what you're giving away. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at the house for 60 seconds. Then I turned around, walked back to my car, and waited. I need to stop here for a second and talk to you directly. If you have ever quietly funded someone else's dream, while they took credit for the aesthetic. If you have ever been the infrastructure behind someone else's performance, I want you to sit with what I'm describing right now. Because what Valerie built wasn't just a property. It was patience. And patience, when it finally runs out, is the most dangerous thing in the world. At 12:15 p.m., I drove slowly past the front of the property. The transformation Eleanor had engineered for the garden party was, I had to admit, impressive in its ambition. White linen draped across rented tables arranged on the lawn. Floral centerpieces in cream and pale gold, the kind you order from a boutique event company that charges by the stem. A temporary bar set up near the garden wall, staffed by 2 people in black shirts who were currently arranging glassware with the focused precision of people who did not yet know they were about to witness something extraordinary. Caterers moved in and out of the side entrance, carrying trays. I could hear music, something instrumental and deliberately tasteful floating out from speakers I couldn't see. Eleanor had thought of everything. She had constructed this afternoon with the same obsessive attention to detail. She brought to every performance of status, every carefully staged presentation of a family that had arrived somewhere worth arriving at. The guests had begun filtering in through the front gate. I recognized the body language immediately. The careful posture of people who had been told this was an important occasion and had dressed accordingly. Julian's future in-laws, their associates, exactly the audience Eleanor had been curating this moment for. I drove past without stopping and parked around the corner. At 12:52 p.m., my phone buzzed. Marcus Webb, en route. 8 minutes. I got out of the car. I walked to the corner of the street where I had a clear sightline to the property's front gate. And I stood there, in my bone-white blazer, in the clean Malibu afternoon light. And I felt something I want to try to describe accurately because I think it matters. It was not satisfaction. Not yet. It was not anger. That had burned clean 48 hours ago, leaving nothing behind but structure and clarity. What I felt standing on that corner was something closer to recognition. The specific feeling of seeing a system finally behave exactly the way the data predicted it would. The feeling of a consultant standing outside a client meeting, knowing with absolute precision what the numbers inside that room are about to reveal. Knowing that the moment the document is opened, the conversation changes permanently and irreversibly. I had done this professionally dozens of times. I had never done it personally. My hands were completely still. At 1:03 p.m., a black sedan pulled up to the front gate. Marcus Webb stepped out first, silver-haired, impeccably suited, carrying a leather document folio, with the particular unhurried confidence of a man who had executed legal proceedings in far more complicated environments than a Malibu garden party. Behind him, 2 sheriff's deputies in full uniform. Behind them, a court official carrying a sealed document envelope stamped with language. Eleanor was not going to enjoy reading. The gate was open for the party. They walked straight through. I followed at a distance of 20 feet. I want you to picture this scene clearly, because the details matter. White linen tables, cream and gold flowers, instrumental music, 47 guests, mid-conversation, glasses raised, performing exactly the version of success Eleanor had spent 3 years building this afternoon toward. And then 4 people in professional authority, walking through the garden gate like a bill that had finally come due. Stay with me. I heard the music stop before I cleared the gate. Not dramatically. It simply ended, the way a playlist ends when nobody is managing it, leaving behind a silence that was sudden enough to make people turn their heads. I watched the ripple move through the crowd. The way awareness travels in a group. One person noticing, then the person beside them, then the cluster near the bar, until the entire garden had oriented itself toward the 4 figures, moving with deliberate, unhurried purpose toward the center of the lawn. Eleanor was standing near the main table with a champagne flute in her hand when she saw them. I watched her face cycle through expressions the way a corrupted file cycles through error states. Confusion first, then the polished social recovery smile. She deployed automatically in uncertain situations. Then something underneath the smile that I recognized as the first cold touch of real fear. Julian was beside her. He saw the deputies before he registered anything else, and I watched his jaw tighten in a very specific way. Not the jaw tightening of someone who is angry, but the jaw tightening of someone who is calculating rapidly and not liking the results. The court official stepped forward. Eleanor Vance? Eleanor laughed, a short, bright, entirely unconvincing sound. Yes? I think there must be some misunderstanding, officer. This is a private event. Ma'am. The official's voice was professionally neutral, the tone of someone who has delivered unwelcome documents in the middle of pleasant occasions before, and has long since made peace with the discomfort it creates. I have a legal notice here requiring your immediate attention. He opened the envelope, the immediate eviction and asset freeze. Notice from Coastal Asset Holdings LLC. Eleanor took the document. She looked at it. I watched her read the LLC name once, quickly, the way you read something that doesn't make sense the first time. Then again, slower. Then she reached the section that listed the registered owner of Coastal Asset Holdings LLC, and I watched the champagne flute in her hand tilt at a slight angle, the liquid inside shifting, as every single muscle in her grip went momentarily slack. Julian snatched the document from her hands. He read it faster than Eleanor had. He was younger, sharper in the specific way that people who spend their lives operating in gray areas develop sharpness, attuned to exits, to shifting situations, to the exact moment a room changes temperature. The room had changed temperature. I stepped through the garden gate. 47 people turned to look at me simultaneously. Eleanor's eyes found me across the lawn, and in them I saw the complete, instantaneous collapse of every narrative she had constructed about this family, about this house, about the version of herself she had been performing for 3 years inside walls that had never once belonged to her. Julian's face did something I had never seen it do before, in 24 years of watching him navigate every situation with practiced ease. It went completely blank. The court official spoke again, clearly, into the silence of 47 people who had stopped pretending they were not watching. The property known as this Malibu estate is registered under Coastal Asset Holdings LLC. The sole principal of that LLC is Valerie Vance. This notice requires all non-authorized occupants to vacate the premises within the legally specified time frame. Additionally, the vehicle currently on the property, registered under the associated business account, has been formally deactivated as of 72 hours ago. Someone near the bar set their glass down. The sound it made was very small and very loud at the same time. Eleanor turned to look at me across the garden. Her mouth opened. What came out was not a sentence. It was something more fractured than that. a sound assembled from the wreckage of everything she had believed about this afternoon, about this family, about the particular architecture of who owed what to whom. Valerie, I looked at her. My hands were still. My voice, when it came, was the same voice I used in boardrooms, measured, clear, carrying exactly as far as it needed to carry and no further. The party can continue, I said, but the house doesn't. I let that sit in the air for exactly 3 seconds. Then I turned to the private security team that had positioned themselves discreetly along the perimeter of the lawn, right on schedule, and gave them the single nod we had agreed on in advance. They moved toward the side entrance, where Eleanor and Julian's personal belongings were about to begin their very public, very organized journey to the curb. The arithmetic was complete. The output was on the screen. And I was done doing math. Chapter 4 is the final reckoning. Eleanor's desperate plea, Julian's humiliation, and the one-line Valerie delivers that will stay with you long after this video ends. Don't go anywhere. There is a moment in every major restructuring. And I have sat inside enough of them to know this with certainty. When the people who built their comfort on a flawed foundation finally understand that the foundation is gone, not when they are told it is gone, not when the documents arrive, when they see it happening, when the physical, undeniable reality of consequence begins moving through the space they believed was permanently theirs, and there is nothing left to negotiate, reframe, or perform their way out of. I watched that moment arrive for Eleanor Vance at 1:17 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon in Malibu, in front of 47 people. She had spent 3 years trying to impress. The private security team worked with the kind of quiet, methodical efficiency that I had specifically requested and specifically paid for. No drama in their movements. No commentary. Just 2 professionals in clean, dark clothing, moving through the side entrance of the beach house, and beginning with complete organizational calm to transfer the personal belongings of Eleanor and Julian Vance from the interior of the property to the area outside the front gate. Detonder luggage first. 4 pieces of Eleanor's. The matching set she had purchased 2 summers ago and mentioned to me on the phone, as though I would want to know. Then Julian's bags, his gym equipment, the collection of sneakers he kept on a dedicated shelf in the guest room, like a rotating exhibition. Then the smaller things. The framed photos Eleanor had placed on the mantel. The decorative objects she had arranged on shelves over 3 years of occupancy. The accumulated texture of a life she had built, inside a house she did not own, being carried out in careful armloads and placed on the public sidewalk in the clean afternoon light. Every single guest in that garden watched it happen. Nobody spoke. Eleanor moved first. She crossed the lawn toward me with the particular urgent momentum of someone who has run out of performances and is operating now on pure instinct. The deep animal instinct of a person watching was their constructed world disassemble itself in real time. She caught my arm near the garden wall, away from the main cluster of guests, though not far enough away that the people nearest to us couldn't hear every word if they chose to. They chose to. Valerie. Her voice was lower than I had ever heard it. Stripped of the social polish she applied to every public interaction, like a coat of paint over uneven walls. What was underneath was older and rawer and genuinely frightened. Valerie, please. In front of all these people. You introduced me to these people as someone whose work doesn't translate, I said. My voice was even. Not cold exactly. Precise. The way a scalpel is precise. I thought it was time they understood what I actually do. That was, I didn't mean. Her hand tightened on my arm. I looked down at it and then back up at her face, and something in my expression made her loosen her grip. This is family. You cannot do this to family. Whatever, I said. Whatever Julian did, we are family. You handed me a suitcase in the rain, I said. 3 words would have been enough. Those 6 landed like a structural report delivered to a board that had been ignoring the warning signs for years. Not loud, not theatrical. Just irrefutably, permanently true. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed. You handed me a suitcase. I continued. At the front door of a house I purchased, maintain, and legally own, and you told me I was an unemployed failure, who would ruin your family status. You said that to me. At 11 o'clock at night. In the rain. I was. Julian had his fiancé's family coming. I was under enormous pressure. I know about pressure, Mom. Something moved across my face that was not quite a smile and not quite grief, something in between. The expression of a person who has finally arrived at the exact place they have been walking toward for a very long time. I have been under pressure since I was 19 years old, and you called me on a Wednesday about an electricity bill. I managed the pressure. I managed it quietly, without asking for acknowledgement, without requiring an audience. I just managed it, and kept managing it, for 8 years. Eleanor was crying now. Real tears, not the performative kind. I knew the difference, had cataloged the difference over a lifetime of watching her deploy emotion strategically. These were real. Her mascara was tracking in thin dark lines down both cheeks, and she wasn't attempting to stop it, which told me everything about how far past performance she had traveled in the last 15 minutes. I didn't know, she whispered. About the house. About all of it. I didn't know it was you. I know you didn't know, I said. That was the point. I protected your pride. I let you believe you had a generous, anonymous landlord, so you wouldn't have to feel indebted to the daughter you described as a failure. I paused. That was the last generous thing I'm going to do for you. If you are watching this right now and you recognize this dynamic, the one where you protected someone's ego at the cost of your own acknowledgement, I need you to hear something directly. That is not love. That is self-erasure with a family label on it. Drop a comment below. Tell me your story. The Shadow Drama Stories community reads every single one. Julian had not come to find me the way Eleanor had. I found him. He was standing near the temporary bar, slightly apart from the guests. The navy blazer still on, the whiskey glass in his hand, but everything that had made him magnetic in that living room 3 weeks ago. The easy confidence, the practiced charm, the particular glow of someone who has never once been required to account for themselves, had gone somewhere else entirely. He looked young, 24 years old, and suddenly, visibly, undeniably young in a way he usually worked very hard to conceal. The car's been deactivated, I said, stopping beside him. Not confrontational, just informational. The way you deliver a status update. His jaw moved. Val. The account it was leased under no longer exists as an active business line. The leasing company has documentation. They'll be in contact about the vehicle's return within 5 business days. I need that car. His voice was tight, controlled in the way that people control their voices when they are managing something much larger underneath. I have meetings. There are things in development. You know I'm in the middle of building something, Julian. I said his name the way I say a client's name when I am about to deliver the section of the report they didn't want to receive. You have never been in the middle of building anything. You have been in the middle of borrowing infrastructure and calling it yours. I looked at him directly. That ends today. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. The math was not on his side, and we both knew it. The guests began leaving quietly and in clusters, the way guests always leave when an event has revealed something about the hosts that cannot be unseen. Polite departures, brief, careful goodbyes. Julian's future in-laws. The entire point of this afternoon, the audience Eleanor had constructed this performance for, left without speaking to Julian at all. I watched his future father-in-law shake hands with Marcus Webb near the gate, as though they were colleagues at a professional function, which in a technical sense, I supposed, they now were. By 2:30 p.m., Eleanor and Julian's belongings were stacked neatly on the public sidewalk outside the front gate of the beach house. 4 matched designer suitcases. 6 additional bags. 2 rolling garment carriers. The framed photos from the mantel, wrapped carefully in dish towels by the security team, because I had specifically asked them to handle Eleanor's personal items with care. Whatever she had done, whatever this day was costing her, she did not need her photographs broken. That detail felt important to me, and I'm not entirely sure I can explain why. Except to say that I had spent 8 years being careful with things that belonged to people who were careless, with things that belonged to me, and I saw no reason to become a different version of myself. Simply because the situation had changed. Eleanor was standing near her luggage when I walked through the front gate for the last time. She looked smaller than she had at the dinner party. Smaller than she had at p.m. when the documents arrived. The afternoon light was doing her no favors, and she had stopped trying to make it. She was just standing there, in her garden party dress, beside 4 matched suitcases on a public sidewalk in Malibu. And the specific quality of her stillness told me. She had reached the place I had reached 72 hours ago, at my kitchen table. The place where the numbers are finished and all that remains is the total. She looked at me. Valerie. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Please, I'm your mother. I stood on the other side of the gate, my property, my name on the deed. And I looked at the woman who had handed me a suitcase in the rain and told me I was an unemployed failure who would ruin her family status. And I felt something move through me. That was not hatred and not indifference, but something more complex than either. It was grief with its eyes open, the specific grief of someone who has loved a person fully and clearly and finally understood, with the kind of certainty that cannot be undone, that the love was never going to be returned in the form she needed. I had needed acknowledgement, visibility, the basic human experience of being seen by your own family as something more than a financial utility. I was not going to get that from Eleanor. I had known that for years. Today I had simply stopped waiting for it. I looked at my mother standing on the sidewalk in her garden party dress, and I said the last thing I was ever going to need to say to her. You didn't harbor a failure, Mom. My voice was steady. Completely, finally, permanently steady. You just evicted your landlord. I turned around. I walked back through the gate. I closed it behind me. The Malibu house sold 14 months later for $2. $6 million. A $500,000 return on my original investment that I used to seed a new consulting firm operating under my own name. No LLC buffer required. I had nothing left to protect my identity from. Julian returned the car. He took a warehouse logistics job 3 months after the garden party, and from what I understand, has kept it. I do not know whether humiliation was the making of him, or simply the interruption of a pattern that would have continued indefinitely without it. That is, his arithmetic to run. Eleanor and I have not spoken. I do not experience that silence as punishment. I experience it as clarity. The specific clarity of a system that has been restructured correctly. Redundant costs removed, boundaries properly documented, resources redirected toward things that generate actual return. I am 30 years old now. I run my own firm. I sleep without the low-frequency anxiety of a person who is quietly funding a life that doesn't acknowledge them. I drink good wine and I notice when I enjoy it. I am not a footnote in my own story anymore. And that specific hard-won, completely undramatic piece is the only revenge that actually lasts. Here is what Valerie's story really teaches us, and I want you to hear this clearly before you go. Financial independence is not selfishness. It is the foundation that makes every other kind of freedom possible. When you quietly fund someone else's lifestyle, without documentation, without boundaries, without legal protection, you are not being generous. You are being invisible. Valerie didn't just win because she owned the house. She won because she had spent years doing what most people never do, protecting her assets, documenting every transaction, and structuring her generosity through legal frameworks that kept the power exactly where it belonged. Keep your name on your investments. Keep your assets in your control. And never, not for love, not for family, not for the performance of loyalty, sign away the infrastructure you built with your own hands. Your self-respect is non-negotiable. Valerie knew that. Now you do too. If this story hit you somewhere real, you already know what to do. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Shadow Drama Stories for new episodes every week. We tell the stories that most families keep locked behind closed doors. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is finally let the truth walk through the gate. Drop a comment below. Was Valerie right to walk away? Or should she have given Eleanor one more chance? The community is waiting for your answer.